today is we're going to tell stories, but we're going to tell stories in particular relating to football and its presence in Asia. Let's introduce the guys who are going to be doing that storytelling. Opposite me, at the far end of our panel here, it's Fox Networks Group's EVP and MD Sports for this region and Middle East. He's also a man whose career has taken in sports confederations and one of Europe's greatest football clubs, AS Roma. Italo Zanzi is with me here. Italo, thanks for joining us. Next to him, somebody fresh from a productive time with the ICC, which I think he might just tell us is the product of a long-term vision, is the Director APAC for Arsenal Football Club. Adrian Perezzini joins us today. And then let's bring the European League perspective to this one, and also someone who has a fantastic history in this region of developing sporting brands and properties. The man from the Bundesliga is Kevin Sim. Thank you very much, Kevin, for joining us here today. Let's kick things off then. So the thesis here today is football into Asia, football's presence in Asia. We've talked a little bit there in terms of our setup here. What I'd like to do is talk about a narrative change as we see it, because we're going to be talking about storytelling, guys, today as much as anything. And Asia was once perceived to be a weak participant as far as football was concerned, but perhaps a potentially lucrative customer. Now, that dynamic has changed massively in that Asia leads the way in so many ways right now. Let's talk about the finances. Earlier on today, we were hearing about Asian football. China wasn't a participant, Italo, at the World Cup, but Chinese companies spent a reported $800 million in sponsorship there. Asia's owners' portfolios of Western football properties continue to expand, seemingly by the week, if not the day. The sport's rapidly gaining ground here in this marketplace. And it's a marketplace that's unique, both in its breadth and potential, as well as the pioneering nature of its audience and the way that audience engages with and consumes content. So, stakeholders of all kinds are attracted to Asia. That much we know. What I want to ask you, Italo, to kick things off here, what are the pillars of this growth, and where is the key focus?
So thanks, John. Obviously, like you said, Asia as a continent has always been conceptually interesting, certainly for clubs and for companies who participate in the football ecosystem. But to your point earlier, it's really about the weight that the region and the countries within it now have at the table. Right now, it's about owners from Asian countries calling the shots at major clubs. It's about players from clubs in Asia moving to major European teams. It's about sponsors from Asia actually becoming the primary sponsors of major international clubs. So the presence has always been there. It's really the amplification of the weight. And similarly, the interest in cultivating the Asian country markets has grown exponentially among leagues and teams. And with us today are two very good examples of entities that have done that very well. And as Fox Sports, we're very privileged because as a broadcaster, we sit in a kind of central place to be able to deliver to fans everything that's important in football. So that's from a league live event game standpoint with the Bundesliga. It's about owning the conversation for the Premier League and through clubs like Adrian's. And it's about Asian football, which is actually the sleeping giant, right? The leagues here locally that have so much potential that we are helping to cultivate. So for us, it's a privilege to be part of that ecosystem and hopefully to drive growth even further.
You know, Kevin, I'd like to come to you on maybe some, if you want to dive into some deep numbers on this one, but I'll just set it up by saying I read a study by Professor Simon Chadwick in which he said if football 1.0 was Europe, you know, the codification, the formation of football, if football 2.0 was America, i.e. the market forces driving football, 3.0 is Asia, because of the way that the consumer in particular is informing everything that happens. We shouldn't be surprised, should we, when we sit here and talk about potential?
Absolutely. I think it's very clear that the future is going to be in Asia. I think there's, without a shadow of a doubt, I mean, 60% of the world's population is already in Asia Pacific. Obviously, in terms of economic growth, there's a tremendous amount of growth. Football is continually growing. It's the #1 sport across the region. It's continuing to grow in most of the territories, if not all of them. I mean, I think that gives impetus in terms of economics growth and development. But on top of that, I mean, you look at the footballing side as well. I think if you look at the long affinity of the Bundesliga and the long line of Asian players that have played in the Bundesliga, you look at Cha Bun-kun, which is Asia's player of the century. Okudera in Japan. You look at Ali Dai from Iran. I mean, there's a long line, and then obviously Shinji Kagawa today, and obviously Kuja Kul. I mean, these are players that are continuing, and Okudera. Makato Osebe. I mean, these are players that continue to play in the Bundesliga and shows that Asian players actually can hold their own in European top football. But I think what is just lacking in terms of performance is, sure talent can only take a team game like football that far. What Asia's lacked is a little bit more structure and a little bit in terms of development, coaching, and scouting. I think with that in line, if you put that into perspective, then that gives a lot of growth in terms of long term for football as a whole.
I think we'll come back to what happens when those players go overseas and then come back, and the synergy that exists there a little bit later on, particularly in terms of knowledge sharing and what have you. Hadrian, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the fact that you represent a football club which has taken a long-term position in this region. It's all very well talking about potential, and boy, we've seen plenty of people come to this region starry-eyed at the prospects. But what have you seen at Arsenal in terms of the real rewards?
Well, I think for us as a club, when you look at the different stakeholders involved in Asian football, obviously one very crucial one is the fans. And when we as a club, we realized that actually looking at our global fan base, the region in the world that has the biggest percentage of our fans is actually in APAC. That makes you realize how crucial this part of the world is with all the other kind of economical growth and et cetera, et cetera. So for us, we obviously have an office here, so we're obviously committed to this region. And I think for us, it's all about long-term engagement. Ultimately, when you have all this fan base, we also have a responsibility actually to grow together with broadcasters and leagues, grow that whole football ecosystem, and have that long-term vision for the region, and engage with the fans. So for that reason, I think we mentioned that previously before, the ICC is something that for us is really fundamental, because when we go on tour as a club, we don't just fly in for a couple of days and fly out again. For us, we were here in Singapore, we had the whole team, all our best players in market for an entire week, working with our partners, with our fans, with local charities around the Arsenal Foundation. And we just see this as an opportunity to bring the club to a lot of people that ultimately are not able to travel to London and sit comfortably at Emirates Stadium and watch some exciting football. And this gets us into a really interesting part of what I think we're here to do today, which is to talk about the way fans consume and engage football. And Italo, that's something that Arsenal have been, the last 2 visits they've made to this region, they've really seen the fruit of their labors in terms of the incredible take-up, the commercial activations they've been able to launch, and of course, as Hadrian rightly said, the fan response.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think at the most basic level, one of the most appreciated initiatives I think that a lot of the leagues are looking at is time shifting the matches, right? Because you can look at affinity for something in theory, and you could look at then the ability of somebody to actually activate that, right? And so we have plenty of conversations with stakeholders who say, yeah, but this is a great competition. It's like, yeah, but 2 a.m. is 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. is 3 a.m., right? And people aren't awake at that hour. So one of 2 things has to happen. Either the games have to happen at a time that are more appealing or let's say possible for people to participate in, and or the storytelling has to become broader and has to become deeper, and people have to live it day to day. And thankfully, let's say Premier Football is not short of stories, right? And you could argue that actually there's more stories on non-match days than there are stories on the days that there are games. So we're very focused on that, and we realize that's where the audience is. That's where business partners want to participate in, and you know, the clubs and the leagues are also on board with that. So but in Asia we have to accept that reality that we are in a different time zone, because that's a fundamental piece to the puzzle.
But yeah, it's a fundamental piece, but it needn't be a barrier, because for so long it was tempting to say, well, that's Europe in particular, that's Asia, never the twain shall meet. But obviously there are ways of making that happen, whether it's through engagement, whether it's through bespoke, tailored ways of getting the Asian fan, who very often may never have a chance to actually in person go and watch the team that they support play the game of football. That needn't be a problem anymore. I mean, let's talk about what the Bundesliga does in terms of trying to make it a bespoke experience. I think we're looking at some kind of vertical integration when it comes to what you get to them, but also the bespoke experience that you offer from an Asian perspective. Could you just elaborate on that, Kim?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the best advantages of being at the Bundesliga is that we are vertically integrated, because we are the only league that actually have our own in-house production. From 2006, we have actually set up our own production company for the World Cup. We've actually produced that team has set up to produce the World Cup and then started producing the league as a whole. We have our own data company called Sport Tech Solutions, which is in-house. We have every imaginable piece of data on our players in terms of heat maps, amount of running they do, every piece of information from the weather to everything. So that is available for us in terms of to do storytelling. We have our own digital team, which is the DS. So from that standpoint, I mean, we are vertically integrated, and we can offer obviously bespoke solutions for partners like Fox. But what we have done is then we've taken the step further and using technology and AI to basically cut out content that is localized. So we have, for example, a digital service that goes out to different markets. So because we're a global league, so we have obviously Latin America, Americas, Asia, etc. So what we can provide is immediately from the get-go, the service then pushes out content based on the goals scored from the top 10 goals from players, or we can say the top 3 plays from Asian players. So it already customized and then pushed out to our broadcasters, and they can then use it to push out for their digital services. So that's a great example.
So you customize, so what your audience in South America sees will be very different from what the one in Asia sees.
Exactly.
What informs those decisions? I would imagine that also applies to what you're doing in the digital and social realm as well.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously that is based on learning. So I mean, what we obviously look at for is obviously players. I mean, there's some indicators that says, okay, certain players, for example, Shinji Kagawa, it's Asian, so we will definitely then push out content that's specific to Asia. And then obviously we have players who are coming from Jamaica, etc. So we'll push out content for that specific market based on region.
What's interesting, Adrian, in the Asian context here is that we have long acknowledged that Asia is a marketplace where heroes and idols are worshipped, and that translates sometimes into somebody supporting a player as much as perhaps they might a team. Now that's something that you guys have to come to terms with, because you are obviously a football club, but within that you have component individuals who might just be heroes to certain people, who might support that player but another team. Is that true, that would exist?
Yeah, and that's obviously an interesting topic within that storytelling frame. And I think I don't disagree with you, and obviously we know that this part of the world is more responsive to heroes maybe, or following stars and maybe the winning team of the moment. I think on our side, we've seen that obviously having someone like Mesut Özil, who's the most followed Premier League player on social media, helps. But ultimately, in the last 10 years, we looked at ways to make sure that what we do off the pitch is as successful, as engaging as possible, independently from what's actually happening on the pitch. So again, when you go back to that long-term vision and you say, okay, I'm going to work on this fan engagement on a long-term basis. I'm going to do activations. I'm going to do localized content and digital strategy. You actually end up in a place where your fans, even in this part of the world, are particularly loyal, and they recognize the efforts. They feel close to the community. They feel close to the club. Ultimately, what we want is to make sure that a fan, whether he is or she is sitting in Shanghai, Singapore, Nigeria, or Colombia, feel as close to the club as someone growing up in North London.
When you talk about Shanghai briefly, would I be right in saying that and I think I've covered this, that fans of other clubs sometimes come along to your activations?
Yeah, so yeah, going back to the ICC topic, where we roll out a full program. We brought 100 people here in Singapore for a week to make sure that we deliver value to our partners, all the key stakeholders, and obviously the fans. We saw in certain cases that some other fans from some other top clubs obviously feel differently about their club and ultimately end up coming to our activations with their shirt and taking pictures with our legends and mingling with our fans, and being quite disappointed that not everyone is having that kind of approach.
And of course, Italo, this is something we don't have to take an entrenched European position on, is it? This is something we have to learn from, because that colors our storytelling in so many ways, an understanding of the way people consume their sport, in particular football here.
Sure, and kind of just following up on what Hadrian touched on, football doesn't need to be competitive necessarily off the field, right? The tide rises. So whether that's club versus club in the same league, whether that's league versus league within Europe, or whether that's league in Europe versus league locally in Asia, ultimately, I mean, I spoke the other day about how kind of sport has a fight in itself among versus non-sport genres. Similarly, football as a genre has its own fight, right? And so any interest in football, whether that be for a local club, whether that be for a German club, or for an English club, all of that drives towards the same end, which is kind of fans enjoying what they like most, business partners having the confidence to participate with media companies like ourselves to enjoy it, and ultimately it all goes to the same end. So kind of the selfless nature of an Arsenal activation that's kind of open to everybody in a festival-like way only helps. Similarly, the partnerships that exist, or that should exist more often, like what Kevin's league has with the Chinese government, right, or at a national level, is certainly helpful for everybody.
Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
So, I mean, basically, I mean, for us, I mean, we definitely want to develop football across the region. I think that's a commitment from the league itself, and the Chinese government and basically the German government have signed a partnership. And as a result, that's now gone into obviously a more league level. So the Chinese Ministry of Football, as well as the Chinese league, has signed a partnership with DFL as well as DFB. So basically the league and the club, league and the federation, so to develop football from the grassroots level. So basically, as I agree with Italo, I mean, basically what we are trying to do is to get more people interested in the category of football. I don't think we are in competition with any league or any club or etc. Contrary to that, actually, we want to grow football completely from the ground up, because our mantra as a company is football is meant to be, we want football to be accessible to everyone. So everyone should be playing, everyone should be consuming content around football. The more people who are interested in football, it's ultimately going to be more consumption across the clubs anyway. So it's fine for us.
Just as it's impossible for us to sit here and paint in entirely broad brushstrokes and draw generalized conclusions about anything, Italo, we have to recognize we're talking about a sport that is vast. We're talking about a region that is vast, and you can't ignore the fact that most stakeholders have arrived at a conclusion that localization and successful localization in whichever form it may take, and of course that's something key to us at Fox Sports, isn't it, is the way to go.
Absolutely, and it's a major initiative for us, not in isolation, but frankly in collaboration with leagues and clubs that we work with, is to try to reach the largest potential market possible in the most accessible, attractive way for the consumer. So with the advent of digital technology and the ability to do things efficiently and to do things in a customized way, we're now out there in 7 different languages talking to fans every day about all of the teams and all of the clubs and all of the sports they care about. Also, it's very welcome that leagues and clubs are now investing their own resources in making sure that those pipes are actually activated, and then they have the right footage behind them. They have the right investment from a club level.
Very easy when you talk about football to get away from the fact that it's played on the pitch, and you look at the competitive side of things. Now, everybody has a different agenda. Everybody has a different end game. But if you draw together a lot of the strands that we're talking here, the Bundesliga, from a federation that is renowned for its coaching of coaches, an association with China, a country that has massive ambitions, therefore you go nowhere without coaches. I mean, Germany outnumbers England massively when it comes to the number of amateur coaches, very well trained. But you also talk about the synergy with players. So players have been overseas, players come back. Surely they impart knowledge. We look at a situation like India, which has a Super League, where there have been high profile, you might say, over-the-hill players there. Now instead, we're seeing movement within Asia of premium Asian players into that league. But we're also seeing Southeast Asians moving into Japan's J-League. So something's happening here, isn't there? There's a circle that can only end positively in terms of playing standards.
So, I mean, for me as a league, I definitely believe that there is a tremendous potential for Asia. I think it's too long that we've been talking about Asia as the future of football. I think it's probably underperformed in terms of population, etc. So I think that there is talent, without a doubt. There's a shadow of doubt. I mean, as I said, the number of Asian players making it in Europe through the Bundesliga, and using it as a final destination, or using it as a training school of sorts, it's obviously a tremendous plus. So you look at the reason for that is because of the sheer investment put into it. It's $1.4 billion since 2002 in terms of investment into youth development and obviously technical. I mean, it's a breeding ground for not only fresh football ideas, coaches, as well as players. So it's in a very healthy state. So I think Asia's got a huge, I guess, a lot to learn from the German model. I think there's a lot of benefit from coming in. These exchanges would actually rise and develop football further, and then that grassroots, as I said, will increase the demand and consumption of football, and then obviously everyone gets the benefit from it.
But of course, there's no one thing that is right or wrong about the way you engage with Asia. And Adrian, you will know that Arsenal's ambitions and priorities will differ from perhaps Manchester City's. It's up to each club, each business entity to decide how and in what way it's going to engage with Asia, right?
Yeah.
It's not incumbent upon you to come here and turn Asia into world beaters as footballers, is it?
No, absolutely not. I think for us, as I said before, I think as a club, together with broadcasters and league, we have a responsibility to grow that football movement in the region. How we do that, everyone's got a different view, and I think everyone's contribution is obviously helping the movement. I think what we also witnessed is coming back to the consumption side of things before, is that actually in this part of the world, some of the aspects of how that content and that football is consumed in the region has drastically changed, obviously. So if you ask me, is Asia the future of football? I would say it's already the present, because we're all in the storytelling business in one way or another. And actually, if you look at this part of the world, it's one of the biggest internet users in the world. But it's still Asia is still the future of football, because if you look at the penetration rate, there's a massive opportunity there. And when you see internet revolution, how we heard this a few times between today and yesterday happening in India, where basically from one day to another you have the whole population that get access to 4G at a very cheap price. That, for us as a content and storytelling business, it's a fundamental change, because it allows us to engage with much more fans. It allows our partners to engage with much more fans across the country. And I think those things would just keep happening.
Sorry, John, but it's important to understand, like, where Adrian's coming from is the club has a crucial role in this, because when you look at the football ecosystem, this is the apex of the passion point. Right? I mean, we'd love to think people are fans of broadcasters, or fans of leagues, but in the end, they're fans of clubs, right? And so the more that clubs participate in this and become lifestyle drivers of affinity, that's really the fire beneath the entire movement, right? In terms of the actual core fans who are driving things. So for us, it's great when clubs actually invest in it, and leagues help clubs invest in it, and hopefully we become a bridge for clubs to invest in it. But that's where fans really, really care and participate.
Just if I may, I mean, I think there's a slight, I mean, just to add on a point, I get your, and I agree that clubs ultimately is obviously central to this. I mean, for us as a league, the difference is because we work so tightly with the clubs, right, that we are constantly in dialogue with them in terms of how can we engage, Asia Pacific as a whole. So, for example, we are opening, new clubs are opening offices, for the latter part of this year. We are in dialogue in terms of what we can do in terms of publicity, getting the stakeholders into one room, etc. So, to that point, I agree that clubs is central. I mean, obviously, the league has limited assets. I mean, the players are owned by the clubs themselves, so it's easier for them. But I think for us, it's a slight advantage.
And it's not easy because every club at the end of the day wants to win on Saturday or Sunday.
Yep.
Right? And so it's great to have these lofty ambition of international development, and God bless Adrian for doing what he's doing, because it's not easy so often internally to move.
Thank you. You speak from personal experience.
Absolutely.
Yes, Roma.
But if you have a long-term vision, it's definitely worthwhile.
And I think the localization has to happen at all different levels, because clubs have been doing translated website for 10 years now. So when you speak about digital and social and content, it has to be not just translated, it has to be culturally relevant for the people that you're talking to. And then at other level, I don't know, like retail. So we're working with local partners on the e-commerce side of things, because the way a fan sitting in Indonesia is going to be expecting an e-commerce or digital experience is going to be very different than someone in North London buying our jersey. So we want to make sure that even those kind of experiences are tailored and are just speaking and relevant for the local fans.
Let's just wrap things up with the fan. And in terms of storytelling, Italo, and one thing that I obviously do directly 3 nights a week on Fox Sports is I recognize, and have done for many, many years, that because they lead the way in so many ways in which they consume and engage, the Asian fans now know that they have a voice. They have a voice and an opinion, and they know things, stats, data, whatever it may be, that matches and rivals anyone who may be on a high street in North London, could be in Munich, could be anywhere. They have a voice, and we give voice to them. And as such, there's a conversation that we are very much engaged in, which is the football conversation. That's just one thing that we've learned. But I think across the board at Fox, there's so much that the fans have informed us. And I came from a panel earlier on today in which we spoke about content creators and also content enablers. And we came to the conclusion by the end of a really interesting 45 minutes or so that actually the fans, particularly the young Asian fans, are very much informing what we do. They're setting the tone, and we're catering to that. We're supplying that, right?
Absolutely. I mean, a fan in any country in Asia has as much to write or to be at the table as a fan in the native country of the club or the league. And technology has enabled that. And I think it's going to be a really exciting future where there's a global fan base for many different leagues and clubs, but also that the local leagues and clubs also catch up gradually, right, and become part of that ecosystem. And that to me is actually, in some ways, more exciting, right, when you have players graduating like through the football system, right, and also ignite the passion. And you look at an expanded World Cup coming up down the road, right, where in a trickle-down way, that's going to have a very positive impact on football in each Southeast Asian country, at least, which are really kind of the emerging markets of football.
And we have an Asian Cup coming along, which is already exciting us in its breadth and the narratives that we're going to be telling in terms of what happens as far as Southeast Asian nations as well, in many cases for the first time involved in that. Just to wind things up here, so obviously the fans have their voice. What happens next? Is there anything that obviously you see coming along as a radical change in the last couple of minutes we have in the way that you will engage with Asia, or is it more of the same?
I think it's definitely going to change. I think everything that you've looked at, what digital has done is enabled the game to last a lot longer beyond the 90 minutes. So people, I mean, as you mentioned, is now extended across boundaries and across countries and continents. So the game as the global game, as football is a global game, has been able to, people are able to engage and communicate across different and express their frustrations, happiness, etc. Not just, and obviously they are all watching the same game on Fox and on the broadcast or in any of the services that some of the partners have done. But they are now yearning to engage, and obviously that is a true accessibility. Football is now accessible across different demographics, men, women, everyone can get into the game. So I think that's a fantastic development. But obviously that's created more opportunity for the leagues and the clubs as well, but it's also given a lot of complexities, if I may. It's an opportunity, it's very opportunistic now in terms of the landscape.
I don't know how you follow that. So I'll see you here next year. We'll make it a hat trick.
Yeah, there's not much to add here, but I would say I think obviously the key piece is, and it's nothing new to anyone, is the technology side of things. Kevin mentioned before how they work on the different signals for different regions. I think technology is breaking barriers every year. So for us to bring those fans closer to the club, you know, VR, AR, that's kind of the immediate future. Ultimately, I think for us as a club working with someone like, for example, Italo, you know, when we sit down with our teams and say, okay, how can we actually help each other out, and how can we go to that next level of engagement, of storytelling, of bringing that whole football movement to interact with each other is something that we should all keep in mind and keep working on.
Yeah, absolutely. To be continued. Italo, I think we're just about done for time.
Absolutely. If anybody has any questions, criticisms, John's on on the air Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. You can write in to him, and he's usually right, but he'll take your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Italo. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you very much, Kevin. And thank you very much.